The coming storm, why water will right the 21st century. Following Russia's aggressive war in Ukraine, the world is suddenly gripped by concerns over energy security. And yet, there's an even greater threat ahead, and that is the competition for water. Delighted to say that joining me live on the line from somewhere in the UK, I believe, is the author of The Coming Storm, Liam Fox. Liam, good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
Good to have you with us. Whereabouts are you this morning, sir?
I'm in London.
So tell me a little bit about then why we have been since the events of 2 years ago when Russia launched this attack on the Ukraine. It's all been about the energy crisis. We've been thinking nuclear. We've been thinking the way that gas and oil prices have gone up. But in your book, The Coming Storm, you point to perhaps a more pressing energy resource that many of us wouldn't have thought of.
Well, I think that water is the most basic element for human beings. We come from water. We're largely made of water. And I think that the most basic human right we have is our access to clean water and sanitation. And yet a quarter of the world and the human population in it don't have that. And I think that is something that's really unbelievable in the 21st century. We've got 3.5 million people who die from waterborne diseases in a world where we're sending missions to the dark side of the moon. There's something wrong about our sense of priorities. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to write the book. The second was the risk of conflict being generated by competition for water resources. Only 3% of the water on our planet is fresh water. And we're having to divide that now amongst 8 billion people when, a century ago, it was a quarter of that number. We've got a number of places where we're seeing competition for water resulting in upstream nations who control water resources and downstream nations who are dependent on those with very little legal framework for that water sharing. And finally, of course, we have what I regard as the crime against nature of our pollution, of our seas, rivers and oceans. Not least the scandal of the amount of plastic we're pouring into the oceans at the present time. And all of these together, I think, make a political, human rights and environmental crisis that we need to focus on. And our systems of government very often make us look at these different elements in isolation without bringing them together. And that's really why I wanted to bring it together in one book.
Do you think that perhaps we take water for granted? I know you're sitting in the UK, so water is something that falls from the heavens on a regular basis, but I'm sitting in a studio in southern Spain, and we've just had some rain, but we were very, very worried about a drought. We were talking about getting water shipped to the Costa del Sol from Barcelona. Is this, do you think that perhaps we automatically assume it's going to rain, that there is an infinite supply of water? We can just basically, it will always be there for us, and perhaps we become complacent about it?
Oh, completely. I mean, you're talking about water being shipped from Barcelona. It's not very long since Barcelona was having water shipped from the south of France because of the lack of water supply there. Spain is quite a water-stressed country. And absolutely, many people take water for granted. British tourists who come to Spain and look at lush green golf courses have little idea of the stress that there is on agricultural producers, fruit and vegetable producers in Spain at the present time. Here in Britain, of course, we get a lot of rain. People do very much take water for granted. But if you go to a lot of countries in different parts of the world, they don't take it for granted. They're, in fact, very concerned about the level of water that they get. And all of this is changed by the pattern of climate change that we're seeing around the world, which is, of course, pumping more energy into the water cycle, exacerbating the trends that we have. And we'll see from that a lot of wet places getting wetter, but a lot of dry places getting drier.
And it's interesting you mentioned the golf courses. I mean, obviously those, where I am is renowned for its golf courses, but that can have, for example, 20 minutes inland from where I am at the moment, there is an agricultural region, and they're going to think of putting a water park up there, big attraction, the tourism, the hunt down the city, it's going to be great for tourism, it's going to attract people. And the local farmers are saying, hang on a minute, you say you're going to get this water from recycled water, desalination, but we know how it works. And we're not very happy about you stressing our already sort of impacted water reserve. And this shows that water can be used, or it can sow political division and also social unrest.
Absolutely. Well, we've seen in micro some of that. There was an interesting case in Kenya a few years ago when during a drought period, a water truck was driven into a village to supply water, and it was besieged by monkeys who also were looking for water. And it actually took humans with guns to scare the monkeys off. In sort of microcosm, that's what it's all about. There will be an intense competition for water between people, and we've got a mismatch between the human population and where we have water at the present time. So you've got areas that are very water stressed in parts of Asia where there is insufficient water. Now then you've got, on top of that, you've got the climate change elements. Now, just to take that one example, in Asia, where most of the drinking water is supplied by rivers that arise on the Tibetan plateau, that's the Indus, the Ganges, Brahmaputra, Mekong, Yellow, the Yangtze. They all come from the Tibetan plateau, and the glaciers on the Tibetan plateau are melting twice as fast as any others, in the Alps or the Andes or the Rockies. The reason for that, of course, is that both China and India burn coal for energy, and that leaves a very thin film on top of the snow, so it actually absorbs energy rather than reflecting it, which is why those glaciers are melting. Now, while they do, you'll get more meltwater. In the summer months, you'll get more flooding in places like Bangladesh, Pakistan, but eventually they will dry up and you will go from flood to shortage. And then there'll be intense competition for water. And my fear is if we don't manage our water resources better and we don't anticipate the problems, then the sort of migration that we've seen in the world in recent years may be massively magnified. So it's a global issue that we need to think about in terms of global solutions. And your question is a very pertinent one about taking things for granted, because just because in one part of the world we don't necessarily feel the pressures today doesn't mean that we won't be affected by the lack of action tomorrow.
And this is the thing, isn't it? Because it's, in the words of the movie, it's everything everywhere all at once. And so you might not think that the melting glaciers in Tibet or the feeds in Tibet have anything to do with you. But when you start to get migration, sort of not even economic migration, but environmental migration, then they will be feeling the effects.
And we do need to think about all of these different issues and how they relate to one another, to sort of link them together when we think about global trade and we think about what we buy and where we buy it from. Should we really be buying strawberries from water-stressed countries? Is that encouraging them to have a misuse of the resources they have? Should we be buying cotton shirts from countries where their water systems are being stressed by the production of one of the thirstiest crops in the world? One of the concepts I was talking about in the book is that, we've gone from Adam Smith and absolute advantage in trade to Ricardo and relative advantage in trade. Should we now be thinking about ecological advantage in trade? In other words, should we be finding a way to give consumers better information so that they buy goods from places where it's more sustainable in terms of the water resources that they have? We have a tendency to think only about our own national political issues rather than global ones. And the bottom line there is that global problems can only have global solutions. They cannot be solved with narrow national solutions.
So, but that is the thing, isn't it? Because the the thing with politics is it is normally nationally based. You just don't want to do the best for your constituency, and perhaps we need politicians who are aware, or leaders who are aware of the global impact on this. And I think more and more are becoming more aware of this, but it is very hard sometimes to say we need to do something about water when maybe your constituents are saying, yes, but I want my bins emptied, or I want this bus route. I'm in a rural area and I can't get my bus route has just been scrapped.
Well, I think there's sadly in the West, there's a growing tendency to become even more introspective and localized in terms of our politics. But I think that what we need political leadership that actually does look at the global issues. It does constantly point out our responsibilities not only to other people, but to the wider global environment on which we are ultimately dependent. And I think we need to bring these issues to the public's attention. I mean, when we talk, for example, about plastic pollution, how are we going to deal with that on a global basis? Will we need to have a global plastic convention or a treaty of some sort? We've just had the first microplastic snow arrive in Antarctica. It is now everywhere on the planet. We can't simply pretend that our borders are the limits to our environmental problems and ignore our wider global responsibilities.
I have friends who do the yacht route from Mallorca to the Caribbean and, taking yachts back and forth. And they say you would not believe the amount of plastic that is currently floating in our ocean, out of sight and out of mind. But it is indeed perhaps an issue that is coming home to roost in the most unwanted way. Tell me a little bit about how you first got involved. Is it WaterAid? Because you were, if you're like, ahead of the curve on this one. Because this is not something you've just leapt to. This is something you've had an interest in and a stance on for a long time.
Well, my first interest really began in the issue sort of on a global sense when I was a junior minister in the government of John Major, so quite a long time ago. And I was in the Foreign Office, and I was responsible in the House of Commons for questions on overseas aid, and I was in Calcutta at a water project that had been paid for by the UK government. And it's when I first really realised that not everybody had access to clean water and sanitation in the way that we take for granted in the UK. And it was a project to bring sewers to a part of Calcutta that didn't have them at the time. And it was wonderful to see how much people appreciated that. And I got an interest in the subject really because of that. And I've been contributing to WaterAid, one of the best world charities on that for some time. And in the book, I encourage people to give to these charities because, as I said earlier, I think the most basic human right we have is to get access to clean water and sanitation. I mean, it was the 19th century where Britain introduced the measures to give that to people in the UK, probably the single biggest public health intervention we ever made, because it made a massive difference to the rate of waterborne diseases. We have got a duty, I think, to ensure that the things that we take for granted are made available to other human beings around the world.
And talking about weaponization of certain things, and people have talked about, this was a war about, this so-and-so war was a war about oil, and this was a war about gas. And you only have to look at the Russians blowing the dams in Ukraine to realize that pretty soon we're going to have weaponization and wars for water.
Well, you can have. We've got very little international law about the sharing of water resources. You've got areas where you can very easily see where conflict could come. We've had, in the terms of the Nile, we've had Ethiopia just fill the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam, which effectively gives Ethiopia control of the Blue Nile. We will see in the sort of areas that you're talking about, the emergence of upstream nations who are able to control water because they have control of the headwaters of these rivers. And we'll have other nations that will be dependent on them. Very little international law that sets out, what the responsibilities are in all of that, you've got all those rivers that we just mentioned in coming off the Tibetan plateau, the Indus, the Ganges, Brahmaputra, Mekong, Yellow, Yangtze, all of which are now controlled by China. There are around 56,000 dams in the world. About half of those are now in China. So there's the ability there to be able to control those headwaters, which obviously produces a risk of conflict if there are disputes between the upstream states and the downstream states. There's no reason, given human behavior, why we shouldn't use water as a weapon in the way that we used other things in the past. And we need to think about these things in advance and try to work out ways in which we can ensure that the most basic human commodity remains available.
So are we now, if you like, at the tipping point? Are we at a vital point, and that is why you decided to write The Coming Storm?
Yes, we are. We've still got time to deal with some of these issues before, I was going to say before they swamp us, perhaps the wrong choice of words, but before they become really critical issues for us. And we need to think about them now, how we better create rules around the sharing of water, how we better preserve our groundwater, how we stop the pollution and the destruction of the great aquifers from which we draw a lot of water, how we deal with the issues of pollution in our oceans, how we stop mass migration by ensuring that the quarter of the world's population that don't have access to water and sanitation do so. The cost of giving people clean water, the cost of giving every human being clean water by 2030 is less than we spend per year on alcohol in the world, and not much more than we spend per year on cosmetics. We need to seriously engage our populations on the debates around these subjects. No one is talking about it, and yet it's an issue that affects every single one of us in the most profound ways.
So how, if I'm sitting on my terrace with my cafe con leche somewhere in southern Spain, overlooking the golf course, am I going to feel guilty about and maybe having an avocado? Am I going to feel guilty about going out and having that round or having that avocado? Or what steps can individuals then take to help alleviate this, or become more aware, or get the message out there, Liam?
Well, we can be aware of the global problems. There are wonderful water charities out there who are trying to improve the conditions of those who don't have access to clean water and sanitation. We can do our bit by contributing to them. When you're looking at your avocado, maybe think about which country that's come from, and is this a country where the production of that is going to provide further stress on the water system there and the people who depend upon it. That, I think, requires better consumer information. I would like to see producers giving us better information so as consumers we can make more informed choices. And, of course, we can not waste water ourselves. We can all do our bit to ensure that we are protecting, in a small way, that commodity that other people may be hugely dependent upon.
Are you optimistic about where we're going with this, or do we need to take action sooner rather than later?
Well, I'm optimistic in the sense that where there have been disputes on water, in terms of the sharing of water, it has actually tended to produce new agreements rather than new disputes. But the potential for dispute is always there. And in the book, I set out a number of geographical locations where we need to get agreement on water sharing before the potential for disputes between different parties occurs. I think that there is the potential for us to be able to provide consumers with better information and to give them informed choices about how our individual actions can cumulatively have an effect elsewhere. When it comes to the elements of pollution, I'm less optimistic there because we've got 4 countries in the world, China, Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia, who pump more plastic into the world's oceans than the rest of the world combined. We need to be looking at new international measures to deal with that. And the fact that even wealthy countries are still pumping untreated human sewage into the world's oceans. And that if you look at the rivers from which that happens, it runs from the Mississippi to the Danube to the Yangtze. So it's large, small, rich, poor countries across the world, all contributing to that. And if you take that last example of the Danube, you've got a river that's relatively clean until you get past Budapest, where I was just a couple of weeks ago, and into Serbia, where the pollution is occurring from that point onwards all the way to the Black Sea. So it requires cooperation and probably international regulation so that one country can't pollute a river that is shared by many.
The book is called The Coming Storm, Why Water Will Write the 21st Century. It's by Sir Liam Fox, who we're speaking to today. You'll be able to order it via our own virtual bookstore. If people want to find you online, Sir Liam, there is a website, isn't there? I'm not sure if you TikTok, but I know there's definitely a website.
Well, I don't use TikTok, but the publishers are Bite Back, and it's available on the 7th of May.
The book is called The Coming Storm, Why Water Will Write the 21st Century. It's by Sir Liam Fox. Sir Liam, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today.
Likewise, thank you very much. Enjoy the sun. I think that you'll be getting a bit more than we will today.
We will try to, Sir Liam. We will try to indeed. Thank you so much for your time today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.